For years, I've been covering science for various publications. I remember one time I was working at a startup, and one of the editors from one of the other sections walked over to me after work one day, and he says, I just don't understand how our science writer believes that the world is 5,785, 86 years old. He said that doesn't really make sense to me. And I needed a quick response, and I spoke from the heart. And here's what I said from the heart. I said to him, I study Hasidic philosophy. I'm not sure the world exists. The least of your problems is how old it is.
Welcome to Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today, we have an incredible guest. His name is Rabbi Yechiel Krish. And Rabbi Krish is a scholar, a rabbi, a scientist, and an award-winning journalist. He specializes in the synthesis between Torah and modern science. Thank you so much for joining us, Rabbi Krish.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so there's so many aspects of you, you're a very multifaceted person. And I thought we would start with your upbringing, your early years, and how you got to where you got to.
Sure. I was raised in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. My parents are Balei Tshuva through Chabad. That means they came close to Judaism through the local Chabad house there, the Mangel family down in Cherry Hill. And I was more or less raised within that. I was raised by two parents who both have very high levels of education, who both value science. My father's a doctor, my mother has a PhD in psychology. And I grew up around that, but also around a real dedication to Chabad and to Hasidus and to the way of life of a Jew. So I was educated through the modern Orthodox day school system for a while, and then made my way from yeshiva to yeshiva. But always with that undercurrent of medical and scientific excellence in my family.
Wow, very interesting. So was there like a special time that you had a curiosity about Hasidus, or was it just always part of your upbringing?
Chassidus was always part of my upbringing. I've always been very curious about it. My father used to come home from lectures, from classes that the Mangel family would be teaching. Rabbi Mangel would teach a Tanya class, and I would sit on his bed and he would review everything that he learned in class with me. So I had a very early fascination with it and a very early connection to my parents through it.
Right. Is there something that was like a favorite teaching or a special teaching that you felt helped you?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. Certainly not from my earlier years. It was much more an impression, a feeling, than any one specific teaching when I was younger.
And what about your later years? What about like more recently? Is there something that really brings you into makes you passionate about it, or helps you wake up in the morning, or helps you deal with a challenge?
Sure. For one, I've made a real study over the past few years of the Rebbe's letters, of his correspondences. That's a little less conventional as a piece of Chassidus, but I found that by reading the Rebbe's letters, many of them, I have my own podcast where I go through the Rebbe's letters, hundreds of them, and something that I've discovered is that there are some real common threads running through the Rebbe's letters, some real ways of looking at the world. And after a while of continuing to read these things, it sort of seeps into your mind, and you start looking at novel problems, novel conflicts, every situation through the lens of the Rebbe. So that influences everything I do. As far as more traditional Chassidus, more traditional Hasidic philosophy, that sort of study, I'm a big fan of the Maimer Ha'umnam. That is one worth looking up. It is a classic that takes you through the significance and insignificance of the world. Starts off with the basic understanding of the world as being something that is entirely under God's purview, and bit by bit chips away at the physicality until one reaches a certain intellectual and emotional apex. It's one of the classic pre-prayer Maimorim. So on one hand, I'm very into the Rebbe's practical pieces of advice, what you really pull from Chassidus and turn it into a way of looking at the world. And I'm also very interested in the way that Chassidus looks at and deals with physicality itself.
So if you're saying that it deals with physicality as not really being physicality, like how does that work with your understanding of science? Like how would you synthesize that?
No, that's a fantastic question. I've been asked similar questions by people who work with me. For years, I've been covering science for various publications. I remember one time I was working at a startup, and one of the editors from one of the other sections walked over to me after work one day, and he says, I just don't understand how our science writer believes that the world is 5,785, 86 years old. He said that doesn't really make sense to me. And I needed a quick response, and I spoke from the heart. And here's what I said from the heart. I said to him, I study Hasidic philosophy. I'm not sure the world exists. The least of your problems is how old it is. And no, that definitely is, definitely it's a, you have science Torah experts, but as among the science experts who are also in studying Chassidus, I think the problem is magnified a little bit because we understand the entire physical world and all of the physical processes of the world to be not just controlled by God, not just sort of supervised by God, but God actively making and recreating every single one of them. How that works with science is a very good question.
So how do you reconcile that as a scientist? I mean, I'm sure some
No,
people are
sure.
listening and saying, like, this is a scientist? Like, what is he saying?
Well, I work in science. I've done science. Yeah, I am a scientist, and this is absolutely what I'm saying. As far as how I deal with it, I understand it to be very similar to the way that I make money in the first place, the way that jobs work. So our understanding as Jews, this is something that's very broadly, very much emphasized in the Shara B'tachon, the gate of trust. The idea that I go to work and God wants me to go to work and God wants me to play by the rules and attend my job and work my hardest. But God also wants me to understand that my money doesn't come from my work, that my money is a blessing that comes to me, and separate from that, I'm supposed to be going to work. I understand science and medicine in a very similar way. Science and medicine is what we would call a keli. It's a vessel. It's working within the physical world. It's what God wants us to do, but it's not where results come from. When a medicine works, it doesn't work because of the keli. It doesn't work because of the vessel. It works because God gave a blessing for it to work. Meanwhile, it's the will of God that we engage with the physical and put on a good show and engage with the actual vessel, making the best vessel we actually can. So I see science and I see biomedical science, medicine, which is specifically my field, as being the vessel for divine blessing, while understanding that it's not the blessing at all and that it's entirely controlled by God. And on top of that, that when God wants to do miracles, he can completely break all of those rules.
Hmm. So if we're just putting on this act, that seems to be what it's interesting that you would be studying so heavily this act. I mean, your study of science is really studying the act that God has put into this world. How does that help you to really understand God more and God's place in this world?
Well, if the question is how you understand God and God's place through science, I would take that from a completely different direction. I was speaking more about how I view the science that I do. As far as using it as a tool
Mhm.
for understanding God, that's one of its main purposes. I would argue it's its main purpose. God created science for us to use it in that way, to better understand him through it. This is how Maimonides describes the pursuit of science when it's done in a kosher way, as a way of coming to a deeper appreciation and understanding of God. When the Alter Rebbe is describing the act of ecstatic prayer, he says that there's an incredible mistake that's made by those who work for a living as opposed to those who study Torah. It's called the tos balei asakim, the error of those who work. And that is that those who work assume that they can't pray as well as those who study Torah all day. And the Alter Rebbe says that's completely wrong. People who engage with the physical, they can reliably talk about the greatness of God, whereas those who study Torah all day don't always know what they're talking about. When we praise God for making these enormous mountains, or for making incredibly deep seas, the better appreciation you have for what is a mountain and what is a sea, the better your prayer is. And if you've never seen a mountain and you've never seen the ocean, you just don't pray that well. We say, Li kesef li azav nu Hashem, that all gold and silver belongs to God. If you're not involved in the economy, if you're not involved in economics, that rings hollow. If you're somebody who works in business, it means something. Given that a whole lot of our prayer is dedicated to glorifying the God who creates and recreates at every moment the entire natural world, my study of the natural world makes me significantly better at praying, or at least significantly better capable to pray. Question of whether one will do it is always an open question between you and your evil inclination. However, I certainly do believe that a scientist can pray better than almost anybody else because of their knowledge of the natural world.
So give us an example when you're praying, like
Sure.
how has your knowledge of science impacted your prayers to make it so much deeper?
Sure. I mean, to be perfectly honest and very open with you about how I've been praying the past couple weeks, I've been praying on the topic of the nucleolus for weeks now. I had to cover a study that was in the minutia, what was going on inside the dark portion inside the nucleus of a cell. And thinking about this has taken me on journeys through prayer. But let me do one a little more accessible that I do think about every day, rather than getting into the deep science of the nucleolus. I remember my son asked me, I have a 9-year-old, my son asked me a couple months ago how deep the ocean goes. And I didn't know how deep the ocean goes. So I went and looked it up. And apparently it goes 35,000 feet down in the Mariana Trench, which is, as far as we know, the deepest part of the ocean. We say in the prayers, we say in our prayers at least once a day, I think twice a day, we mention in our prayers that God is the God of the incredible depths, of the depth of the ocean. One way to pray is to skim over that and go, God, you're really big, you control the mountains, you control the ocean. If you understand a bit about oceans, a bit about depths, a bit about what can exist down there, about what it means to have that level of pressure, when you meditate on the idea of there being a depth of 35,000 feet down, which is as high as an airplane flies high except downward, the incredible temperatures, in the inverse, the incredible pressures, the fact that God sustains life down there, if you pause at those words in prayer, as I have done on many occasions, and think through that entire thing from a scientific perspective, and then after that declare that God rules over all of that, it just hits, as the young people say, it hits different. The prayer is different.
Right.
It's a different prayer than saying God's the God of the depths and meditating on those depths before you declare God the God of them. And this is what I do as I pray with the science that I know and with the science that I study and learn, is I try to read it directly into the siddur. I try to read it directly into the prayer book.
That's fascinating. Can you give us some more examples or another example of how you bring science into your life so much, into your faith,
You mean outside of prayer? Or more
or
prayer
in any
examples?
area?
I mean,
Yeah,
in
whichever.
prayer, you talk about the heights of mountains. There's so much going on there to talk
Right.
about. So in prayer, it's the same theory over and over again. Uh, in my own life, how do I bring science into my service of God?
Hmm.
Let me think for a moment. In prayer, it's direct. It's so direct, the idea of bringing science into your prayer. I don't know that people can pray without a little science. I would,
Wow.
I
So
really,
should we all be learning science? Should
not
we
a,
be learning like
not a
those?
lot of it, but a little, sure. I think a basic understanding of the natural world is a prerequisite for ecstatic prayer. I really do. Not much, but there's always, if you're not wasting any of your time, if you're studying Torah all day, then I certainly don't think you should waste any of it on science if it's not your field. But if you are wasting your time on something else, I think the best time waster that there could be would be an understanding of the natural world that you can then use for prayer. But as
Yeah.
far as things outside of that, as a rabbi, one of my major areas of expertise, something that I answer rabbinic questions on, is medical ethics and medical Jewish law. And a lot of times, the questions that I'm asked require a background in medicine. And I would either have to reach out to somebody who understands these things better, which is what many rabbis do, or I can draw on my own knowledge in order to augment the answers to these sorts of questions, especially when it comes to things specifically like medical devices, for example. Sometimes a person is not allowed to go to mikveh with certain medical devices attached to them. Some medical devices can be attached to them when they're in a mikveh. My knowledge of how medical devices work, what can be attached and detached, and where exactly they are on the body and how they're attached and detached, informs my ability to answer questions regarding whether somebody can go to mikveh, take a ritual bath. So things like that. I do end up applying medicine and science to a lot of what I do. And this has always been my understanding of my role in medicine and science, is that if I'm doing something, it needs to be for God. I understand everything we do as being dedicated to God Almighty. So if I'm doing science and if I'm doing medicine, and I've been doing it my entire career, I'm always looking for opportunities to apply it.
So fascinating. So do you like, how do you apply it all? How do you apply it in your work?
What do you
I'm,
mean?
I'm curious, like, how have you made your work, your career, so revolving around science? You didn't dedicate your life to just be a scientist. You dedicated your life to be a scientist who works within Torah, who works as a rabbi. Why did you make that decision? And how do you enact that?
I wish I had a better answer to why. I don't see another option for a Jew. I don't know how a Jew goes through life and doesn't apply everything that they have and everything that they do to the only thing that matters, which is the service of God Almighty and the Torah itself. I don't. I didn't know there was an alternative. I'm still not aware of one. I reject the possibility of an alternative. So my
Ha-
why, I don't have much to say. Please.
has this always been your attitude and your perspective? Was there a point in your life that you were at a crossroads where you weren't sure where to pursue as a teenager, as a younger person? Was there ever, something that was pulling you in a different direction?
I certainly was pulled in different directions, sure. Not directions away from that big goal. The idea always was that I would do something professionally and that I would apply it entirely to the service of God. That was always the deal. Those were the principles I was raised with, and also the principles really that I was raised with through Chabad itself. There's a book that's been translated into several languages, including into English. I think in English they call it the Lubavitcher Rabbi's Memoirs. And in Hebrew, it's called the Sefer Zichronis. These are the memoirs of the Rebbe Rayatz, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he just tells stories. It's story after story after story of what it was like to live in the shtetl. But there are some themes that are the undercurrents of every story, where you can tell he's pushing a message. And I think one of the most coherent messages that comes out of those stories is the value of working by the labor of your hands, the value of having a job, of working in the physical world, perhaps in a profession that people don't necessarily think of as inherently Jewish, a blacksmith, a shoemaker, a science communicator, and dedicating all of your energy to God. So that idea was given to me through Chabad. That idea was given to me through my family. That was always there. But other directions, sure. At one point, I thought I was going to be a doctor. I was training in biology, and that's sort of a natural direction from an undergraduate degree in biology. I thought about other things in medicine. I thought about doing scientific research mainly. I thought about staying in research. I started off in basic science research. We were doing breast cancer research with rats and things like that. I considered continuing down that path. I ended up in science communications because it's what I'm good at. That's the truth. I ended up in it because I discovered it was something that God gave me a natural ability for. And that natural ability I've been able to refine over the years, and it's done a lot for me in Torah as well. Because the main thing that I do is that I open up these texts that most people don't understand, scientific studies. I talk to experts who are narrowly in their fields the most important people, but they aren't necessarily known to the general public. And by speaking to the subject matter experts and by looking through the complex studies, I take all that information and then I distill it for the general public. That's really been my job from the beginning. And that's done me enormous favors. Honing that skill over 15 years now, something like that, has done me enormous favors when it comes to teaching Torah, because Torah is taught in a very similar way, lahavdil, but in a very similar way. You go into the primary text that most people don't have access to or don't know how to read. You spend a lot of time with subject matter experts, great teachers, great rabbis, great shluchim and shluchais who know what they're talking about. And then you take that and you distill it for the general public. So I found that there's a lot of crossover in what I do and what I aspire to continue doing. And that's probably why I ended up entering in and staying into this field. I'm passionate about the idea of taking the primary source and distilling it for the general public.
Interesting. Wow. So, there's so many different multifacets to your interests that I'm hearing about, in the last few minutes. Can you tell us a little about a typical day in your life? Like, what would it look like?
Sure. I'll tell you how today's going so far. I'll tell you what the plan is for today.
Okay.
I think my Wednesday is illustrative. We have down the street from me, we have a minyan. We have a prayer quorum that meets, that everybody prays together at 6:30 in the morning. I usually wake up around 5:45. I go to the mikvah. I study some Chassidus. When I'm studying Chassidic philosophy, if it's in the morning before prayers, it's usually that mimer I mentioned earlier, that ha'umnam. That's my go-to. So I study in the morning, and then I pray with the group. After that, I study some Torah for a little bit. Which is what people should do, by the way. People pray and then they waste it. People learn and then they waste it too. A person who learns should pray with it, and a person who prays should learn with it. It should be a sandwich. So after prayers, I do sit down and study a little bit. Usually they're the revealed aspects of the Torah, some Talmud, some Rambam, some of Maimonides. And then after that, I head to work. Sometimes 3 days a week, I go into the city to work. Today is one of my work at home days, which is why we're able to do this. So today I'm working at home. Took a quick break from work to talk to you. So normally what I would be doing right now, what I was doing up until now, is I'll be reading scientific studies and distilling them, writing them down, writing them into press releases, calling scientists, some of the leaders in their fields, to talk about the work that they're doing and understand it well enough that I can explain it to journalists or to policy makers or to stakeholders. And then I'm writing different versions of it down for everybody to understand, sending it into editors, getting the edits back. That's sort of the middle of my day. Usually at some point in the middle of my day, I give a class of some kind in Torah during some sort of lunch break. Today, I'm going to be heading over. Right after this, I'm going to be heading over to the Cheder Chabad in Monsey, where I'm going to teach something like this. I'm going to teach sort of topics in Torah that you wouldn't expect. That's the class that I teach there. Topics in Torah you wouldn't expect to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Other days of the week, I teach 19-year-olds in Crown Heights at the seminary. I teach the high school girls on Fridays, so in Monsey here. So I teach somewhere almost every day of the week. Continue my work, and then when I get home, I spend some time with my kids. I have a mincha, I have a mariv. Usually there's a shir to give at night, and then back to it all over again.
And I understand you have a quite a large family as well.
With God's help, yes. 5 kids. The oldest one is 9. The
Beautiful.
youngest one is 2. So.
Wow. So an active family life. So that sounds like wearing a lot of different hats in the day. How do you keep changing from one hat to the next?
You start by having a very good wife. That's the beginning, is that a lot of those hats are worn by her. She wears the most difficult hats. Besides that, a schedule. There's an expression, a chassid is a mesudar, which means that to be a Hasidic Jew is to be an organized person, and it doesn't really work otherwise. I think part of the wisdom of that is that the Hasidic lifestyle, when done right, requires more hours in a day than you have, and it just doesn't work if you don't keep a schedule.
Yeah.
Taking not dipping my toes into things I haven't planned to in advance is definitely a strength. There was a period of time where I said yes to everything, and I appreciated that. And I think people who I said yes to appreciated that. But then I had to say no to all the people I'd already said yes to because I ran out of time. I've discovered that an orderly lifestyle is the way to get things done, however much my personality pushes against it.
Now I know why it took so long to get this interview.
That is the truth of it. That's the truth of it.
Right. Wow.
Well, I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. We're very happy to have you. So tell us a little about your journalism work. I know you received some awards in your work in journalism. Tell us a little about what you do there.
Sure. I haven't done strict journalism for about 5 years, where I started working more in institutional communications. Prior to that, I worked at some pretty interesting publications. I used to do a good deal of freelance work for the New York Times. That's the one people generally recognize. And I worked in the science section there, which is the best section of the New York Times by far. That's where all the most interesting stuff happens. There's a Tuesday insert, so I worked there. We could talk about that. I did some work for Scientific American, did some work for The Atlantic, did some work for Popular Mechanics. And a bunch of startups. What would you like to talk about?
So I'm just wondering if you felt that there was any resistance, from people or skepticism from people, from a religious Jew working in the field of Torah and working in the field of science and putting in so much Torah in it. Like
Sure.
New York Times doesn't seem like a place that they would really appreciate the Torah perspective. How do you navigate that?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I didn't navigate it by hiding. I've always looked like this. So I've gone to some pretty influential places and talked to some pretty influential people, and I didn't need to remove my beard for the day or my yarmulke. And I've learned firsthand, and I very firmly believe that nobody needs to change the way they look as a Jew. That nobody needs to act differently as a Jew in order to succeed professionally. This is something that many Jewish professionals, I'm sure, have told you in similar discussions. But I'd like to reinforce the idea. It was never necessary for me to change anything about my Judaism anywhere I worked. As far as pushback, not really at all. What I've found is that if you're, I don't want to say good at your job because that's not the right phrase. If you're hardworking, if you try your best and you are capable, people generally speaking don't push back against anything that you do. And that's something that I've made a priority of. So when I was freelancing at the New York Times, I used to regularly come into the office. I had sort of like a semi-desk there. I wasn't a full-time worker, so I didn't have a proper desk. But I had a desk that I would share with someone else whenever one of us were in the office. So I was around the office a lot, and I was in the regular New York Times building a lot. And I not only did nobody ever bother me, there's no reason anybody would have ever bothered me. I appeared as myself. I appeared as a hard worker. I did what I was supposed to do. I kept Jewish law to the highest standard that I know. And there were never any problems. As a matter of fact, one day in the middle of the winter, when Shabbos ends early, I was there on a Friday, and a non-Jewish editor tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Don't forget to go home. You're going to miss Shabbos. You're going to miss your Sabbath."
Wow.
So I found them very encouraging. I had only positive experiences, really everywhere I worked. I will tell you something. I don't know. This is the kind of thing that's so interesting that you might want to cut it, but I'll tell it to you anyway, and you decide if you want to keep it in. My father is a physician. My father's a surgeon, and he has a long white beard, and even worse than my beard, like properly white, like proper. He looks like an old Hasidic rabbi. I didn't mean old. He looks like a Hasidic rabbi, an old Hasidic rabbi, and he's dealing with patients every day. I was at a conference where he was there, and so were a bunch of other Jewish doctors, and they were discussing anti-Semitism in hospitals and how to deal with pushback against religious Jewry. And some of the doctors dressed as religious Jews to work, and some of them did not dress as Jews to work. You wouldn't know by looking at them necessarily that they were Jewish. And they went around the table and asked, "Have you had bad experiences at work? Have you had anti-Semitic statements, attacks?" And the Jews who did not dress as Jews invariably said yes. My father and the ones who dressed as Jews all said no. And I really do believe that I really have come to believe through my own experiences, through my father's experiences, through the experience of a lot of other, I have a community, thank God, of working people who look Jewish. I think the first step to pushing back against anti-Semitism or inconsiderate comments and feelings toward Jews in the workplace is to be a proud Jew in the first place. I find that proud Jews are just not targets like the Jews who are hiding.
So you never had any comments?
No, not really. The only one I can think of is the one I told you about earlier, and it was kind of friendly.
Right.
So, no, not really.
And what about pushback in terms of bringing God into science? Like if you're writing a science column, do you bring God into science?
Well, that's the thing. I don't particularly bring God into science when I'm writing a column. Only because that's not
Hmm.
the assignment. When I'm thinking about
Hmm.
it, that's how I'm thinking about it. So if I'm studying
Hmm.
something, I'm banking it for how am I going to use this for God and Torah. But the assignment is to describe a piece of a cell. I'm going to write about a piece of a cell. I'm not going to put in at the bottom, by the way, by Yechiel Krish and God. Um,
Right,
but
right,
I do
right.
suspect I suspect very strongly that because this is what's going on in my head, it seeps into my writing. I suspect that my
Mhm.
writing has in it an appreciation for God Almighty who made what I'm writing about. But I don't specifically attribute anything to God in my writing. That you're right. I'm not sure how well that would go in the workplace.
Mhm. And what about with your fellow colleagues, like with fellow scientists? Do you ever have discussions about God and how you see God in science?
Well, I have
And is
some.
there pushback or resistance?
Even if there was pushback or resistance, I don't think I'd care. I don't want to offend
How would you
anybody.
respond to it?
I'm saying I don't want to
Right.
offend anybody. I don't want to upset anybody. But if in a normal conversation I mention God, that's who I am, right? I don't think people generally police their personalities unless what they're saying hurts somebody. And I would never say it in a way that hurt anybody. But if, for example, when people ask me how I'm doing, I always say thank God. I don't think that raises alarm
Mhm.
bells. And if people ask me what I'm up
Mhm.
to, and I talk about the fact that my entire life in and outside of the workplace is dedicated to God, I don't find that really rubs anybody the wrong way. I do
Mhm.
during specific holidays offer Jewish stuff to any of my colleagues. So we have an inner office email where you can send out emails to everybody. And I found that the best way to approach offering Jewish services without pushing things on people that they might not be ready to or might not want to is to put out these open offers. So I'll say something like menorahs are available at my office, free giveaway. Anybody can come by during this time and that time. People will come to my office and we'll talk about Hanukkah and I'll give them a menorah. I'll do a very similar thing with Rosh Hashanah with the shofar. Usually, one of the local shluchim, I'll put out a thing saying the local shliach will be at the gate. The local Chabad rabbi will be at the gate of the university at this time if anybody would like to come by to hear the shofar. These sort of interactions, I mean, they center Judaism, but I just can't imagine how anybody would be upset by them, and nobody has been. Um,
Right.
am I answering your question, or did you have something more
Yeah, yeah.
specific?
No, that makes sense. I'm wondering, let's say when you give talks to a lot of Chabad houses, you
Yes.
speak about God and science and the interface between the two in many communities and many of your speeches. What kind of what is the message that you want people to take from it? And is there resistance in how you are, from the people and accepting that?
You know what's funny about resistance to my science Torah talks? I should step back a little bit just and clarify for the listeners. My science Torah talks are usually about reconciling the two. I usually pick the 5 or 6 times where the science says one thing and the Torah says the other thing, and I make them work. And by making them work, I mean Torah wins. I mean that's what I mean by making them work. And when I make them work, I don't use any of my own ideas. This is something that I've been very strict about from the beginning. Is that I, as a policy, will not come up with science Torah reconciliations. I find one from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and then I explain it to everybody else. So I don't have any of my own ideas. I'm very strict about not having my own ideas on this topic, and I have a
But
reason for it. The
but
reason
I
why
guess
is
as a scientist, you're really understanding
that's
what you're
you,
saying
you
from the
you
Rebbe.
hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it. What I think I bring to the table is that the Rebbe will say something, and I can back it up with a whole bunch of data. So when I'm presenting
Mhm.
what the Rebbe says, I think I'm able to round it out and fully explain what the Rebbe means. What he might be saying in a few words, I can explain using the full breadth and depth of science. But the reason why I rely on the Lubavitcher Rebbe is because that way I'm not going to be wrong. A person can make a mistake
Mhm.
if they're not relying on people who are much smarter than them, much holier than them. In any event, I do a lot of these reconciliations of science and Torah, and I've got to tell you, the pushback I get is universally, almost without exception, from non-scientists. Scientists don't
Mhm.
mind the science Torah reconciliations. They make a lot of sense to a scientist. They bother non-scientists, and I can tell you why if you'd like.
Please,
Yeah,
yes,
the
sure.
reason why is because the truth is science and Torah never really are in conflict because science and Torah speak completely different languages. Science is the best available evidence. That's what science is. There's no such thing as scientific truth. There's no such thing as scientific proof. Science is never done. Otherwise, I'd be out of work, and so would a lot of other people. And every good scientist approaches science as possibly wrong and subject to revision. That's the idea of science, is that what I have up until now, I'm not taking for granted. I'm going to test my hypotheses. The entire idea here is that science is a work in progress where if you give it enough time, it is very likely to eventually arrive at the truth because it keeps on trying to arrive at the truth. If you keep on spinning the dice,
Mhm.
eventually you end up with the right answer. That's the theory of science, is that we mount evidence and then move toward truth. Torah just is truth. When God says he made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, he did that. If science doesn't say that yet, that's because the best available evidence has not found that yet. It's not because science and Torah disagree. So right now, the best available evidence, I'm very willing to tell you, the best available scientific evidence is that the universe is 13.7 billion years old and that the planet is 4.5 billion years old. But it's not right. The truth is that the world is 5,786 years old. I know that because God who made it told me that. Why is that? That's not at odds with science, though. That's at odds with the current theory in science. That's at odds with where science has arrived so far. I believe if you give science time and keep on doing great scientific work, you'll arrive at the same conclusions as the Torah. It just takes a while. Science is the long way. Knowing it already is the short way. I believe that science is the single best way that humans have ever figured out, have ever discovered, of figuring out an unknown. But the things in the Torah are not unknowns. That's God telling us what he did. Those are not unknowns. If the best available evidence points to something that we know is wrong, we go back into the science and keep on running those trials. We need to keep running the trials. So when I tell this to scientists all nod. That's something that every scientist understands. We're not knocking science at all. We're not taking away the legitimacy of science. As a matter of fact, we're encouraging more science. Keep on doing what you're doing, and we believe very firmly that you're going to arrive at the correct answer. Just you keep on going. Tell a non-scientist this, it drives them crazy. People who aren't trained in this particular field, they understand science to be the conclusion, which it isn't. And they go, how dare I take my religion and fight against a conclusion? That's not how scientists view things, but it's how everybody else does. So I find myself spending a lot more time trying to explain science philosophy to non-scientists than Torah philosophy to scientists.
Very interesting. Fascinating. Very good point. On the other hand, though, I mean, someone would argue that what you're saying, that Torah says the world was created in 6 days and how old the world is, you're taking that as a fact, whereas that's really a belief.
I don't think it's a belief. I think it's a fact.
Okay. You believe that fact.
It's really not, belief is I guess special. I guess it's nice to have a religion, but I got to tell you, our people for 3,500 years, for 3,500 years, our people have lived and died by this book. It's not just a religion. It's not just a service that we attend on weekends. This is our life. Kihem chayenu v'arech yamenu. This is the life and the length of our days. It's not a belief. What the God says in the Torah is fact. God is real. The Torah is real. Moshe emes v'sarasa emes is something we say over and over again. God is truth and Moses is truth. These are facts. And as a scientist, I take that into consideration. If I have a fact already, I don't need to collect evidence for that fact. For many things, the Torah doesn't tell me so many things. There's so many things not in the Torah. I mean, they're there. The Torah contains everything, but not obviously in the Torah. And for that, I lean very heavily on science as the best way to figure out things observationally. But for stuff that God told me already, why in the world would I question that?
So what about someone who doesn't have that belief yet? How would they come to these conclusions? How would they get to there?
I told you I'm a big fan of the Rebbe's letters, and there's a number of letters where people write to the Rebbe that they don't believe, that they're having faith questions, they're not sure about their faith, they're not sure they believe in Torah. And I collected something like 20 or 30 of these, and the Rebbe gives the same answer across every letter, and it really has influenced my thinking as well, so I'll share that one with you. When people tell the Rebbe that they have faith questions, the Rebbe essentially says, no, you don't. I'm paraphrasing, but the truth is the Rebbe will write back, you're an inheritor. You are the child of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Your faith is something that is inherited. Your faith is inherent to you. The evil inclination of a Jew can push them in negative directions, but that's not an inherent one. It doesn't naturally come to a Jew that they wouldn't believe in God and Torah. That's alien to what a Jew is. If a Jew believes they don't believe, they've just gotten a little bit confused, but that's not who you are. The truth is, every single Jew believes in God and Torah for the very large reason that they are part of it. The Torah is our book, and inside ourselves, inside each of us, we have a godly soul, which is a literal piece of God. You can't not believe that you exist. You are the thing that you're questioning. When you go back and question the premise, a Jew does not actually have a faith problem. A Jew can't have a faith problem. A Jew can have a distraction. A Jew can be confused. And when a Jew removes the parts of them that are not true to themselves, and a Jew acts like a Jew is who they really are. When you look in the mirror and you really see yourself, that particular problem goes away, not the other ones. You might still be an angry person. A Jew can be authentically angry, and they're going to have to fix that. A Jew can be authentically into eating too much, and they're going to have to fix that. And Jew is never authentically questioning faith. That's not something a Jew does. It's not what we are. That's inauthentic to us. When a Jew understands that's inauthentic to us.
So if a person has these questions, should they just squash them? Like, what should they do with these questions?
Honestly, I think they should squash them. I don't mean it that way, though. When I say squash them, I mean two things. Number one, if there are things that can be moved out of the way, they should talk to a trusted mentor who can help move their problems out of the way. A lot of what we do in the reconciling of science and Torah is there's a letter where somebody writes to the Rebbe saying that they can't be religious. They just can't absorb the Jewish lifestyle because of dinosaurs. I wish I could be religious, but dinosaurs.
Right.
That's the way they write to
Right,
the Rebbe.
right.
And the Rebbe writes back, let me get dinosaurs out of your way using two logical arguments that will reconcile dinosaurs with Torah, and after those arguments are out of your way, I expect you to act like a Jew. So if a trusted mentor can get some of the problems out of your way, it's certainly worth talking to a trusted mentor. But I'll tell you the truth, in most cases, in really most
Well,
cases.
now that you
Yeah.
brought up the dinosaurs,
Sure.
could you tell us how?
Sure, but make sure I get back to that one, right? So
Yeah, okay.
you want dinosaurs in the meantime? Let's do
Sure.
dinosaurs.
I mean, just
Right, the Rebbe
as
has
a
two
footnote, right?
very quickly, two approaches to dinosaurs the Rebbe brings up. And remember, he doesn't have a favorite. The point here is to say that there are two ways to logically reconcile dinosaurs with Torah, and you can use whichever one gets the problem out of your way, because the job of a Jew is to be a Jew, not to spend their life, wiggling around dinosaurs and Torah. I will just begin by saying dinosaurs are awesome. They just are. I'm a big dinosaur fan, so I'm a bigger fan of one of these two arguments than the other, but they both work. Argument number one is that dinosaurs lived and died before the flood, before the biblical flood. The problem with that is that it takes about 100 million years to fossilize, to do permineralization. And we don't have 100 million years to make dinosaur fossils, to turn a bone into a rock. To permineralize, you need about 100,000 years or more, and we have 5,786 years. The solution to this is that it's almost true that you can't fossilize things very quickly. You can fossilize things very quickly if you have a couple conditions. Number one, you need a lot of water. Number two, you need a lot of heat. Number three, you need a lot of minerals. Silicates are ideal. And number four, you can need a whole lot of ground moving from A to B, moving things around a lot. If you take all of that together, you can fossilize things almost overnight. The fossilized, what do they call it? The Arizona petrified forest. The petrified forest in Arizona has fully fossilized trees, which means there's no organic matter left. It's just rock models of trees. And scientists suspect that happened over the course of a couple days, weeks, years, very, very quickly, because there was a lot of volcanic ash mixed with a lot of water. And when you put all that together, you have all the ingredients you need to rapidly fossilize. The biblical flood has all of those ingredients. First of all, there's water everywhere, but in addition to there being water everywhere, there's incredible heat. The Talmud tells us that the water was boiling or near boiling, and that the reason it got so hot was because of subthermal venting, that underneath the ground, these vents released heat, and we know, see, this is where science helps. We know that when underground vents in the ocean release heat, they release an enormous amount of silicates, just the kind of stuff that you need to fossilize rapidly. So one possibility is that you had dinosaurs before the biblical flood, and they died then, or they died before. The flood fossilized them rapidly, and therefore the fossils appear to be much older than they actually are. We have a good deal of experience with things like this. There's a lava flow in Hawaii that we know is only 100 or 200 years old, but when we do radiometric dating of it, it appears to be significantly older, on the order of hundreds of millions of years old, even though we know it's not that old. And that's because of those sorts of things. Cataclysmic events can mess with your radiometric dating. They can mess with your fossilization. So one possibility that Rebbe says is that when you take a look at how radiometric dating works, and if you take a look at how fossilization and permineralization works, the flood has all the ingredients to really mess with your numbers. Could be dinosaurs were around more recently. Another possibility, I like that one. That's the one that I like, because that gives me dinosaurs. The one that I'm less fond of, but it's also an approach that can move the problem out of your way. Scientists like this one better, generally speaking, is that we have a principle in science. Just because you see a bone in the ground does not mean that it was once attached to a living thing. See, non-scientists don't like that one at all. They go, what do you mean? I've never seen a bone that wasn't once attached to a living thing. And a scientist would agree, we never have seen that, but that's not how science works. We don't say that everything we see must be based on the thing that we've seen it associated with. We're open to the very, 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 very slim possibility that you can start with a bone sometimes, that sometimes the ground just makes bones. Now, what are the odds of that? Say pretty slim. What are the odds of cells making themselves? Also pretty slim. What are the odds of a lot of things making themselves, right? So scientists won't rule that out. So the Rebbe says, if you're as comfortable with that approach as another one, who says that just because we have fossils in the ground, they were once attached to living things? And that is, believe it or not, a more scientific answer than the first one, but less accepted on the surface. Yeah. So anyway, those are the two ways the Rebbe handles the dinosaurs. What were we talking about before dinosaurs?
Well, before that, we were talking about how you would, someone who doesn't have that belief, someone who doesn't have the belief of Torah, how they would come to.
So first of all, talking to a trusted mentor, talking to a rabbi or a friend or a rebbitzin about all of the about your problems, that can help. It definitely can remove the problems and get them out of the way. But I think that approach is overrated relative to the much more important approach of recognizing that the Jewish soul already believes, and the problem is the soul doesn't always communicate with the brain. Sometimes there's a divide between the brain and the soul. And if you can remove that divide, then the soul will talk to the brain and give it faith, and you won't have to do a lot of work. I'll explain this in a second, but I want to just say the reason why this approach of the Rebbe is so beautiful is it assumes that you never have to change anybody. that if anybody's changing you, they're doing it wrong. The act of bringing a Jew closer to Judaism doesn't change them at all. It just gets rid of the things stopping them from acting like themselves. So a person never changes. They just start being themselves. Now, this barrier between
You're just
the soul and the
finding
brain,
what really is there.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. You're finding what really is there. So this barrier between the soul and the brain, one of the things that causes that barrier, that the Rebbe mentions in many letters and is mentioned in many works of Kabbalah, is a kosher diet. That a Jew who is worried about their faith should watch their kashrus a little more carefully, making sure that they're eating kosher food and eating kosher food to the higher standard. Not eating kosher food and eating food that is not up to the highest standard is brought in many Kabbalistic books to build a wall between the mind and the soul, such that the soul can't talk to the mind. So watching kosher food, studying Torah, attending a Torah class, these open up the channels between the soul and the mind. I think there's a lot of better ways to solve people's faith problems than answering the specific questions. I think it makes a lot more sense to open the channel. And a Jew opens the channel through Torah and mitzvahs. So through diving into it, even though you're not quite sure about it right now, on faith, this is where belief happens. Believing that you believe, that's where belief has a place. The belief that you believe, in the meantime, while you're studying Torah and doing mitzvahs to open up that channel, I think is the most effective way to impart faith. I also think it's the most genuine. The truth is, if we're talking logic, and right now we're talking logic, especially dinosaurs, we're talking logic. There's always a better logic. If I use one of these books that's out, there's like 1,000 books proving Torah, proving Judaism intellectually, and there's a place for that. There's a place for the rational approach. There's a place for using the rational mind and logic in religion. But the big flaw of it is that every logic has a better logic. If I can come up with a logical proof for God, you can come up with a disproof, and then I'll come up for a proof for your disproof, and we'll go back and forth forever. And the truth cannot be the domain of the person who speaks the best, talks the loudest, or gets in the last word. That's not how you find truth. You find truth in here. And if you want to find truth in here, that comes from experiencing Judaism in a way that opens up the channel between your mind and your soul. I think there's not as much to be gained by fighting it out on the ground and answering the dinosaur questions. But if that is the only problem, if a person is basically a believing Jew who just has a little bit of science in their way, talking to a mentor or listening to one of my lectures sure can help.
Right. Very interesting. So you're saying just dive right into it. Drive
Absolutely.
into it as if you believe, and then you might just become that believer. Then you will
Absolutely.
become that believer.
I'm reminded of the
because you're
last
just
Mishnah.
uncovering.
I'm reminded of one of the last Mishnah, maybe the last Mishnah in Tractate Peah, that says that anybody who pretends to be blind, God won't let them die until they become blind. Very harsh. Anybody who pretends to be lame, that they're missing a leg or something, God won't let them die until they miss a leg. That is, if you fake a disease, you're going to get that disease. Our Rebbeim have commented on this. I believe many of our Rebbeim have commented on this by saying, I don't remember which one of our Rebbeim was the first to comment on it, but it's in a lot of our Hasidic works, that this applies also to being a Chassid, that this applies also to being a Jew, that if you fake it, God will not let you die until you've made it. I believe somebody once complained that the Hasidim are not acting like Hasidim, and one of our Rebbeim answered back, what do you mean? It's a Mishnah in Peah. It says right there in the Talmud that if you fake being blind, God will make you blind. If you fake being a Chassid, God will make you a Chassid. If you fake being a believer, you're going to open up the channel and become a believer. I do believe there's a real power to imagination. The Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, talks about the Kayach HaDimyon, the power of imagination. It's a major theme in Likutei Diborim, in his work Likutei Diborim, how Jews can arrive at incredible heights through initially imagination that is later unsubstantiated. I do want to just say, imagination by itself isn't good enough. The reason why the imagination works is because there's reality beneath it. If you imagine something and there's no substance to it, it floats away. But if you really are tired and you close your eyes, you'll fall asleep. And you really are a Jew. So if you close your eyes, if you go through the motions, you really will be a Jew, because the truth is beneath the imagination. I'm not advocating, God forbid, an imaginary Judaism. I'm advocating a Judaism where you're already there, just missing the feeling, and that the feeling is acquired initially through imagination. And yes, I think that's without a doubt the most powerful tool in the toolbox.
Right. You're not just saying to escape this world or to escape reality. You're saying you're confronting reality. You're finding the real reality of who you are.
I really am
Not just
tired. I
this
just need to close
imaginary.
my eyes. Absolutely.
Right. Right. Wow. That's very interesting. I want to go back to something you spoke about in the beginning. You said that you start your day off learning the Hasidic Mimer, which talks about how the world is not really a world, how we're just really acting in order to make a living. We're acting it out. The world feels like it's a world, but it's really God who's holding the strings behind it. What happens in your own life when you feel like things are not going the way that you want it to go, and you feel you do need the keli, the vessel of this world, and it's not happening, like making a living or like a health issue or many issues that people are confronted with today? How do you deal with that on a personal level?
I asked myself two questions. Number one, check the keli. I check the vessel. You do have to put in effort. God doesn't like it when you don't put in effort. So I do check to make sure that I've put in the correct amount of effort. And when I say correct, that works in two directions. It's possible that the blessing is being blocked by my putting in too much effort. A person who puts in too much effort is showing that they don't believe in God, that they don't trust in God, and that itself, too much of a good thing can also clog the drain. It is entirely possible that I'm trying too hard, and I've abdicated my trust and faith in God and given it over to my business or given it over to my own power. And it might be time for me to actually dial back my vessel. That's one possibility. It's also possible I haven't put in the effort. A Jew is supposed to put in the effort. But after checking on my vessel and making sure I'm putting in just the right amount of effort, which, just to throw this out there, I've, through reading Shar B'Tachon, my current conclusion, which is subject to change, is that just the right amount of effort in anything is what the average person would do in that field. So what does the average person's workday look like in your field? What's the average medical advice for this particular claim, for this particular disease? I think that's what the vessel looks like, the average. So am I doing the average the way I'm supposed to be doing the average? But then, assuming the keli is in order, I've got to look at every other aspect of my life and ask myself, am I serving God with all of my strength? And if I find that I'm not, I'm going to try to repair that there. The truth is, the real answer is usually the vessel is okay. Usually the service of God is also okay. Usually it's the will of God right now, and this too is good. And that's something that requires, regular meditation, regular thought about God Almighty, regular study of Torah to wrap your head around. But we don't believe that there is such a thing as bad. We believe that there's good and good that I don't notice. I might shore up my vessel and I might shore up my own service of God so that God will give me good that I notice. But reflecting on the fact that good is good whether or not I notice it, and that I'm a limited person who does not always notice good when it's there, is not only helpful, it's also true. I will just say, before I end this particular soliloquy, that that's what I do, and it's forbidden for me to do that to anybody else. I saw in one of the letters from the Rebbe Rayatz, from the previous Rebbe, that there can be a kind of trust in God that is treif. There's no such thing as non-kosher trust in God. What does non-kosher trust in God look like? When you take that principle and you apply it to somebody else. You see somebody else who's having a bad day, who's not making money, who, God forbid, is sick or having a problem with their children, and you say, well, must be you're not working hard enough. Oh, must be your service of God isn't what it's supposed to be. You know what you should do? You should trust in God. Have you thought about trusting in God? That's not how we talk. When somebody else is suffering, we cry out to God and say, God, please help them. We do whatever we can to actively help them. We break through the major limitations of vessels and give them more help than would be the natural order. That's how we deal with other people's problems. But as for how I deal with my problems, I'm not as generous with myself. I start by trying to diagnose it. I want to figure out what's going on. And if I can't figure out what's going on, I trust in God.
Very interesting. You seem to be a person who has like all the answers. Everything has a right answer. Is there anything that stumps you? Is there any challenge that you have what would you say is your biggest challenge in life?
I have a million things that stump me. I'm just fortunate that I usually don't get asked them. When I when I do, I sound a lot less coherent. I think at this point, as humbly as I can, I think at this point I have the answers to most of the most frequently asked questions. That I can say, yeah. But I got to tell you, no. I stump myself, and others stump me 100 times a day. Thank God. Otherwise, life would get very boring, right? If I did ever figure out all the answers, I don't know what I'd do next. I'm very glad that I haven't and won't. When I am stumped, I call somebody smarter than me. That, by the way, is not what you asked. You didn't ask for my advice. But if you find a question you don't know the answer to, you find somebody smarter than you. And there are so many people smarter than me. And they answer their phones. It's amazing. So I call when I don't have answers to things. What really gets me? What am I still stumped by?
A personal challenge that you face.
A personal challenge. I mean, that one's easy. A personal challenge is easy. There's so many of them. But one personal challenge that I definitely still grapple with all the time is actually what we've been discussing this entire time. That is that I'm a working person. I work in the physical world. And I told you that I believe and I remind myself constantly that God's running the entire physical world. But at the same time, my head is in it. And remembering to remind myself that God's pulling the strings is honestly a constant daily act. It's a constant daily avoda. It's service of God. It takes a lot of effort. And there are definitely days where I go through my day. I bet you there are weeks where I go through my week, and I think I'm in the driver's seat, and I think science that I'm doing is in the driver's seat, and I start trusting the medicine, and I start trusting my work, and I start trusting my incredible writerly skills, and I really think I'm something. And I very frequently get a friendly little slap from the heavens when I do that. God is very kind about reminding me that I'm not as great as I think, and that the science that I'm doing is not as accurate as I think, and that He runs the entire world. So I'm not looking forward to any reminders, but I will tell you, I definitely struggle with that. I think anybody who works in a field where you see so much cause and effect, where I do something and it causes something, that's very much science is a cause and effect field. And I'm also kind of in the arts. I write things, and my writing is hopefully good, and then people appreciate it. So I'm in a cause and effect field where I do things, and because I do things, it appears that I get results. Reminding myself that that my writing is not what makes me succeed, and that the science has a cause and effect, but that's just the sort of clothing that God's blessing wears. That's a daily task. It's difficult. At least it's difficult for me. I work on it all the time, and I'm not there yet.
Mm-hmm. And something that stumps you, a question that stumps you, or you don't want to share that?
No, I have plenty of questions that stump me. I just don't have one off the top of my head.
Okay, that's good.
No, I mean, I can go down that same road. I tell you a question that stumps me that actually this past Shabbos, somebody gave me a really good answer to it, but I'm still deciding whether I like their answer. I still think the question's stronger than the answer. We've been talking a lot about trust in God, and just what God can do for you, and the fact that God knows what's good and God takes care of everybody and always does what's good. Something that I've studied the Sha'ar B'tachon, this gate of trust, a few times through. We have a group. One of the classes that I give is a weekly discussion on Sha'ar B'tachon. So I've been through the book a few times. Something that really does still stump me to this day is that it's very clear that God wants me to ask for what I want specifically. That God wants me to say, I want this. He doesn't want me to just generally pray. He wants specific prayers. That's clear in the Talmud. It's clear in the Code of Jewish Law. I'm supposed to pray for specific outcomes. And it's also very clear that God knows what specific outcome would be good for me better than I do, which means that I'm never really praying for the thing that makes the most sense for me to pray for, right? If I tell God that I would like success in my job, and God happens to know that I would have more success in another job, it would make a lot more sense for me to say, God, I'm praying for job, and just leave it nice and vague and let Him do the work. Why exactly I'm supposed to be praying for specific things when it's very clear that my specific prayer is not as informed as what my Father in heaven will do for me is a question I'm still working on. I'll tell you, somebody I was in the yeah.
And yet, when you're praying for, let's say, a shidduch, a match for somebody, to find your match, you're not supposed to say that you hope this particular one will work. You're supposed to say you hope you find your true, intended match.
Absolutely.
Right?
So my
Your
question is why
intended
we don't do
soulmate.
that across the board, right?
Right.
It seems to me that would make a lot more sense, but I know that it's wrong. I know we're supposed to specifically ask for things. So reconciling those two has been difficult for me. I met a shlucha over Shabbos. I was speaking at a Chabad house, and a shlucha heard me say this, and she proposed an answer, and I think it's a pretty good one. If you're interested in an answer that's been proposed,
Sure.
I'm still wrapping my head around it. But she said, "What about the whole discussion you keep on having about making a vessel in this world and recognizing that the blessing comes from God? Isn't your prayer your vessel?" So I recognize that my prayer isn't supposed to be precise and isn't actually causative, but God wants me to go to work, and God wants me to take my pills, and God wants me to pray even if it might not be the smartest prayer, and He fills in the blanks. I thought that was a really smart answer.
Interesting. Very interesting. Can you share with us any dreams or goals for your future?
I'd like to teach a lot more Torah in a lot more places. That's the thing I think about most of the time. Thank God at this point, I think my calendar for the next 4
It's
months,
full.
I think I'm away every Shabbos for the next 4 months somewhere teaching
wow.
Torah, which is just the most incredible gift, but I'd like to do a lot more of it.
Wow. And thank you to your wife for holding the fort while you're doing
Allowing
that.
and
Right?
holding the fort is the smallest part of what she does. She organizes all of it.
Right.
She takes the phone
Oh,
calls and
wow.
she talks them. She figures out the flights. I can do absolutely nothing without her. She's my best advice to someone who wants to be good at anything is to find a partner who's better at it. That's the
Right.
so no, I can do nothing without nothing besides talk. I appear and talk. She does everything else. But yeah, I'd like to teach Torah in a lot more places. I'd like to study a lot more Torah myself. Those are probably my two biggest goals, things I think about all the time.
Right. Right. Now, I know you're very rushed for time, but my last question, what would you like people who are listening to this interview, what would you like them to get from it?
I'd like them to
What
get two
message
big
would you like to
ideas.
give
Sure,
them?
two big ideas. One is trust in God. I would like trust in God to come through. The idea that although I do believe firmly that if your doctor gives you medicine, you should take it, and I do believe firmly that if you get a job, you should go to it. I think it's very important for a Jew to recognize that their money doesn't come from their job, and that their cure does not come from their medicine, and that God is the source of every single blessing. I think that a Jew who recognizes this has stepped away already from physicality and embraced spirituality in a way far beyond what almost anything else can do. There are very few single acts and single mindsets that can completely catapult a Jew from A to B. And this really does catapult a Jew from A to B. You're a different person when you recognize that everything's coming from God. So that's first one. Second one, on the science Torah front, I'd like to emphasize that there really isn't a contradiction. The thing we talked about earlier, when people encounter these science Torah problems, that's because they are making the incorrect assumption that science is done and Torah isn't sure. And both of those are not correct. Torah is sure, Torah is true. You're a Jew, you believe in Torah. It's what you are. It's your book. You believe in God. It's inside of you. Torah is yours, and we're sure about it. And science is fantastic. It's so good. It should not be discounted by any means. It's holy when applied properly, but it's not done yet. And to consider it a finished work and the Torah a possibility is a mischaracterization of both. Science is on its way, and Torah is very, very well done.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And when I pray, I am going to be thinking about that sea and all the levels that you spoke about in the mountains and all that.
Let me know how it goes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your time and all that you do.
Of course, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Wow, I found that interview with Rabbi Krish so fascinating. He's obviously a very multifaceted individual who has a lot of knowledge. He's done a lot of research in so many different areas. There were so many different parts to the interview. What I especially liked was how he expressed how really learning science and a deeper understanding of science helps you in your Judaism, helps you in your Torah study, helps you even in your prayer. How he explained how looking at the mountains and the rivers is very different for someone who knows science like him, and he can really apply it. I appreciated how he was expressing how he reconciles Torah and science, how there really is no contradiction between Torah and science, and how he sees it as something that's just so just one part of one whole. How he looks at Torah as really facts and real and reality, and how science is really just theories that are becoming, and how his fellow scientists appreciate that. I appreciated how he explained some reconciliations, like how he explained the dinosaurs. I also found it very interesting to hear from him how he, as a religious Jew, approaches people and situations where he comes to the New York Times or to the other places where he works with other scientists and journalists as a complete religious Jew. And when he feels that pride of being a religious Jew, there is no resistance, there is no comments, because when people sense that pride in you, they feel it as well. I also really appreciated how he said how no Jew really doesn't believe, how really it's deep down within us. And he quoted this from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And really, we all believe, and it's just a matter of removing those blockages, those things that are blocking between the brain and the soul, or between the brain and the heart and the neshama, the soul of every Jew. And really, we don't need to necessarily reconcile those differences as long as we just jump into it and really act in the way that we believe. The belief then becomes to the fore, and it becomes so obvious that this is who we are. If you enjoy watching these interviews, and I hope you do, I hope you are subscribed to Chabad.org/extraordinary. Leave us a comment. Tell me what you liked about this interview. Tell me what you gained from this interview. I'd love to hear it. We love to read all of your comments. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure that you are subscribed. Leave us a comment there. Give us a like. We love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this extraordinary community.